welcome to Coming Home, Survive and Thrive in Homeschooling. Children and adversity. It's natural to protect your child from hardship, especially if you endured it yourself. Homeschoolers tend to think strategically. No homeschooling family ended up in this position by default. By definition, homeschoolers decided to come home, and that required thinking about. All right then. Once you've started to think strategically and with purpose, it never ends. This lifestyle means regular and sometimes constant thinking more about something than others might. It gets tiring, but it's a mind muscle that becomes stronger the more it's used. I'm also going to take it as a given today that you, the listener, agree, and I don't have to convince you of it. Instead, we're going to talk about the implementation of it and how to teach your children to live with and through adversity. In these modern times, it has been easier to protect our children from hard times. We're coming out of the most peaceful and prosperous time in human history. Adversity used to be a normal part of living, including illness, death, famine, wars, both large and small, living under an invading regime, loss of finance, pestilence, and the weather. I'm sure there are other troubles to add to that list. In the West, we've come to expect these good times to continue, with science and medicine making such advances to assume we would never return to the adversity known of our forebears. For some, these hard times in life are evidence of God's removal of blessing, and conversely, to be under his blessing if you're experiencing good times. For example, if you are wealthy, it can be seen as evidence of God's blessing on you, and if you lose it or struggle financially, a sign of God's judgment. While there is room for a general sense of blessing or otherwise from the decisions we make, I see this as being more pagan than Christian. That's all I'm saying on that today, as it's not the purpose of this podcast. But since the concept veers into times of hardship, it needed a mention. Our ancestors knew illness and death as a natural feature of life. These days, we tend to view it as an affront and to be avoided at all costs. I'm not saying our forebears didn't care as much or were matter-of-fact when a child died. They grieved as we do. Having their medicines, knowledge, and doctors, they comforted and brought healing, the same as us. However, they seemed to be more circumspect of the natural hardships being just that, natural. But I think because of the advances we've lived through, there is an expectation, spoken or assumed, that illness and death need to be fixed and avoided, and we don't cope very well when it's not. Or the government stepping in every time there is financial hardship. Our son recently said, "It was important to be able to defend what you believe about something." The conversation at the time wasn't about one's faith. It's clear it includes it, but for many, that is the first and only definition. I've stated above what I believe about our forebears, and that is based on a knowledge of history, both distant and recent. That's also all I'm saying about that as I move into the next part of my musing. If you do want me to defend why I said the above, please feel free to contact me. This week, parts of our country, New Zealand, had an extreme weather event, mostly in Auckland. It resulted in flooding not seen in decades, with much devastation and loss of homes and contents. The clean-up, rebuilding and expense will be ongoing for a long time. Some preceding comments. Firstly, there was little loss of life, just 4. Next, I cannot compare this flood to what other countries have suffered. It is big for us because it doesn't happen often, and we were unprepared. Thirdly, the army was not called out to help, which indicates although the effects were bad, it was not bad enough, and I took reassurance from that. But adversity it is, and there is much hardship for those who have lost a lot or almost everything. Compassion and seeing folk helping where they can are a reassuring part of the human response seen in adversity. My husband stopped to chat with the neighbour and see how they were. Their 5-year-old daughter gave him a chunk of still warm, freshly baked bread. A young child seemed to know she needed to help someone. Here's an example of thinking for yourself and helping in adversity. Floods had blocked the main highway, and there was a new highway almost finished, but still under locked chains. Locals snipped the chains without permission, enabling the drivers to move on safely, as was needed at the time. There are many opportunities to bring aid and comfort to those who need it. You know what to do here. Here's what happened, resulting in me wanting to talk about children and adversity this week. Schools were supposed to go back for the year on the Tuesday following the Friday of the flooding. The Ministry of Education quickly announced the delay of school return for the whole of Auckland, including daycare, preschool and tertiary. Once again, we have the authorities stepping in with a one-size-fits-all policy, making a decision on behalf of everyone. Outside the law, this should not happen. Since the last 3 years have been exactly that, the government did it again. It sounded like another lockdown. Then came the political change of mind. The schools were told they could make the decision themselves. I heard from a friend of a young mother furious when the backpedaling came, not because of the inconvenience, but because one of her children's schools decided they would open before the schools of the others. There were tears and unfair. It seems to me she was angry because her child was upset, being made to go back to school. The anger directed at the school fuels and justifies the child's sense of unfairness instead of teaching her how to navigate the times in life which do seem unfair. This could have been a lesson on resilience and understanding the why of some schools choosing to open sooner. Those who did were in areas not as affected by the floods. Lucky them. Those remaining closed were not. That's where the child's pity should have been directed, not on herself. From a practical point of view, why should a largely unaffected school area be penalised by the need to close down a badly affected area? I'm going to read to you an excerpt of a media article this week. Parent, look around you. You know what to avoid and what to do to keep your child safe. and it may be in your area that the safest option is to keep your child at home, or your school may choose to stay closed. But that's because you, as a grown-up, have made informed decisions about your child and the situation you're operating in. You're not waiting for a government ministry or the local council to tell you how to think. What else irks me about this? Decisions like a blanket closure teach our children to avoid adversity and to shy away from any situation that, God forbid, might help them build resilience. We're teaching them that if it's a bit challenging outside, stay at home. If you come across a few roadblocks on the pathway of life, step back from them and wait for someone to clear them away for you. Don't try and find a solution. And we are also teaching children that they are not in control of their own destiny, that there is no such thing as self-determination, and if in doubt, they should always look for an institution or an organization that will tell them what to do. Instead, we should be teaching our children that every problem provides an opportunity for a solution. It's called life. And I will put the link to the entire article in the description area. I would like to know if the author thought the same during lockdowns over the last 3 years, or if she was one of the media backing the politics of a certain virus. Earlier, I mentioned our coming out of the most peaceful and prosperous time in human history. We don't know what the future will be, either this month, later this year, or in the next decade. But it is looking like stormy times ahead. I suggest you do prepare for possible adversity. If it doesn't happen, it will have been an exercise in preparedness. And if it does, then you'll be ready and able to look after your family and possibly others. It's not just about having supplies on hand if the weather prevents being able to shop. It also includes preparing financially and being aware of financial cycles and global trends. By the time the mainstream media talk about this, it's probably too late. I suggest you learn about debt, compounding interest, the repo market, the euro-dollar, and the CBDC. How do we think about and prepare for the possibility of a cashless society and tracked spending? I recently came across a financial advisor who didn't know what CBDC was. Other things to consider would be practical skills to know if some modern conveniences were lost. Gardening, basic cooking, communication. Thinking like a pioneer could be a really helpful and practical homeschool project. Your children need to know how to travel through the hard times of life as much as we want to spare them. Protecting them seems like the right thing to do, but it can be more damaging for them when adversity strikes, and it will. Of course, protecting our children is what we are supposed to do, but removing them from the consequences of their behavior and from natural hardships will not make them strong, independent adults who know how to think. This is why we are always assessing and thinking through how to respond and teach our children through anything which comes our way. And it is up to you to figure out what is appropriate for your child. It is a good practice for us all, adult and child, to be regularly challenged to our current boundary of experience and stretch it a little. Also, go back to my podcast number 56 on funerals to hear my thoughts on children and dealing with death. What are your experiences of living through adversity And how would you advise other homeschoolers? Please get in touch, and with your permission, I can incorporate them into another podcast, or perhaps you'd be interested in me interviewing you for a few minutes or longer. You can find my contact details online, cominghomeinfo.com, or start with a message below in the comments area. Please pass this podcast on if you know it's going to be helpful to others, and I know it is going to be helpful to others. Thank you so much. Bye for now.